World of gliding monsters, sharks in popular culture. My name is Bernard Schober. I'm also known as the Klute. That's a stage name I use for slam poetry. So you can call me Bernard or the Klute or Klute, whatever you feel is comfortable, if you have a question. With us today is Charles Rolsky from ASU. He's a PhD graduate student, and he also runs an organization called Laboratory Casual. So he's focused on marine conservation and recently gave a talk at the State House to our legislative body about plastic pollution and what can be done to mitigate it, stop it, and reverse it. Victor Moreno and Ruby Tate of Cult Classics Arizona, which is Arizona's premier cult movie showcase. They offer shows at the Alamo Drafthouse, I believe, twice a month?
Three times
a month. You can check them out at cultclassicsaz.com. And they have their schedules, and they also every year, or at least so far, have done the Jaws on the Water at the Moxie Hotel in Tempe. You can free to attend. No, not free to attend. Is it free to attend?
Sometimes it varies on what kind of sponsorships we get.
Right. Yeah, it depends on what the hotel wants, but it's worthwhile regardless whether you have to pay a fee or not. You get to float in the pool and watch the movie Jaws. So.
With an open bar, yes.
With an open bar.
With an open. Yeah, right. You can get hammered, as his shirt says. So why are we doing this panel today? Well, I am a shark diver and conservationist. I've been around the world with sharks, with various NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and I love sharks. I think they're the neatest animal. I think they are the most the best expression of the ocean that you can find in a single creature. They are wild and untamed. They can be dangerous. They cannot be dangerous. It just depends on your interactions with them. How we see sharks in popular culture has always been strained, if you will. And that has changed a little bit over the years, I think. And today, that's what we're going to talk about today. How we, as movie aficionados, cult classics buffs, as scientists, as conservationists, how we have seen sharks through popular culture and how we hope that would change in the years going forward as sharks are in danger. 26 years ago, when I first started coming to Phoenix Comic Con as a vendor, 24% of all shark and ray species were threatened with extinction. That number in just those 6 years has gone up to 31%. And we're not talking obscure creatures either. We're not talking about deep water sharks that we haven't seen and we unfortunately, were injured by the Deepwater Horizon or something like that. These are what we would call the Hollywood sharks, great whites, bull sharks, hammerheads. And most, if not all, of our big pelagic or open ocean species are severely threatened with extinction. And so how we can change that is by changing our perspectives in popular culture. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is me working with sharks at Stewart Cove Dive Center in the Bahamas, where I trained to be a shark feeder. You can see I am wearing chainmail because although I did not get bit, even close, you never want to take that risk if you don't have to. And when you're feeding a wild animal, that can be a risk. But this is how much I love sharks, that I will go and I will sit at the bottom and give them fish heads. And hopefully I can get a shot like that. I love that one shark right here because she's kind of like, and these are all females, by the way, which is something that we don't necessarily know exactly why they do it, but a lot of times at feeding sites around the globe, sharks are sex segregated, meaning you'll only see female species, whereas the males have a tendency to not go to the large aggregation sites. That's the case in Bengal Lagoon, in Fiji, and in Nassau, the Bahamas. So, one of the earliest depictions of sharks in popular culture was in paintings. And this one here, by John Stuart Copley in 1778, this is entitled Watson and the Shark. Now, this is a very dramatic depiction of a real-life event where Watson, I believe his name is John Watson, became future mayor of London, was bitten, and I hate to use the word attack because attacks are rare. There are bite incidents, which this one is. He lost his leg. But you look at the shark, if hopefully it's coming across well on there. So right here, look how fearsome he is, and look how mean and nasty, and he looks like he's just going to tear this poor man apart. John Watson Copley never saw a shark in his life. He based his painting on descriptions of sharks, and this is how people perceive them in tropical waters, that they were vicious, ravenous, ready to kill. And this is the kind of the beginning of sharks in popular culture in our first graphic representations. And that was followed up with, later on, with a very famous painting by an American painter, Winslow Homer, who did a poem called The Gulf Stream. And Winslow Homer was a sailor, and he lived along the ocean. And he did this painting, and which is actually one of my favorite paintings because I love the representation going up along the Gulf Stream. It actually does get like this ocean-wise, where we have water spouts and high waves. I've never seen sharks do this, where they're surrounding a boat where there's no food and swarming it. They could, because some sharks, like oceanic whitetips, use natural fish aggregation devices like fallen trees, where other fish would congregate, and then they will come and try to eat the little fish that are around it. But this painting was such a sensation at the time that Winslow Homer had to answer mail from people they were inquiring about the safety of the man on the boat. Did he make it? And because there's sharks, and you can see in the distance, there is a little three-masted schooner in the background that hopefully picked him up. I actually did a companion piece later, which had the man on the boat marooned on an island. That he made it, but he now had a new problem. That idea of sharks in popular culture maintained itself, but people saw it as a tropical problem. And that was until people living along the coasts of the United States and of Europe didn't have an expectation of what sharks would be like until the Jersey Shore shark attacks of 1915, which is what the novel Jaws is based on, and then subsequently the movie. And the people were actually in the water before the attacks happened to prove that sharks were cowardly creatures that would never harm anyone. And one industrialist actually chartered a boat of reporters, went out into the middle of Long Island Sound, jumped into the water after chumming around his boat, and swam with a great white. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, the shark is totally placid. And the shark likely was, because a great white is a cautious hunter, and when some idiot jumps off a boat and starts swimming around, the great white's like, what is this? I am not okay with this. I'm gonna figure it out, but I don't know what it is right now. And so this industrialist swam 1 or 2 times around the boat and got back in. If he had stayed longer, this would have induced what was likely called a provoked attack. Now, what's the difference between shark attacks that are provoked and unprovoked?
A provoked attack would mean you're going to run into shark, so it's going to that you will bite and get you to go away or back off. And an attack is the shark has chosen, you're a good prey, and it's now gone.
Kind of. A provoked attack would be like if I'm spearfishing and I've got a fish on my pole and it's shaking and twitching and mimicking not mimicking, it is an injured fish. And the shark will then sometimes take the fish and then decide he also wants me, sometimes as a territorial, because he wants me to back off. And they don't mean to harm us. 9.9 times out of 10, any negative shark interaction is due to the individual's actions. Spearfishing, cleaning fish in the ocean, which I've never understood why people do that. Don't clean your fish in the water. That's just dumb. The very small margin of negative shark interactions that are unprovoked, we're still stimulating the shark. We're acting like their prey. We're acting like what a prey would look like on the surface, like a surfer with a seal. But that's why we don't like to use the term attack, because if a shark attacks you, you'll know it. If a shark bites you or has a negative interaction with you, he'll let you go, like 9 times out of 10, or she'll let you go. But then came the Jersey Shore shark attacks. And so from literally to the president's cabinet, where he had a cabinet meeting in the middle of World War I to discuss the Jersey Shore shark attacks, to these editorial cartoons, which shows a modern, at the time, bathing costume, which was apparently designed to drive away the sharks. Which is actually not totally wrong in this, because stripes actually have had some apocryphal benefit to warding off sharks from approaching, because they like solid colors. They don't necessarily like patterns, really. So that's been apocryphally. I don't know if that's ever been proved scientifically. So that was the perception of sharks really up until the middle of the century. And then came, of course, Jaws, which very much changed the perspective of how people saw sharks and the ocean and going to the bathroom and going into lakes. And that perception, Peter Benchley, who wrote the novel Jaws, he actually regretted doing it. And many people know this, but he said if he knew what he knew then, what he knew now, before he passed away, he would likely never have written Jaws. Now, this is a very American perspective, a very Western perspective. In the Polynesian and Melanesian cultures of the South Pacific, they see sharks much differently. For instance, Dakuwanga, the Q in Fijian is pronounced NG, is a shark god who is basically, it's a loose interpretation, but it's the King Arthur of Fiji. If Fiji is ever in trouble, Dakuwanga will be loosed from the tentacles of the diamond-eyed serpent and freed to protect the Fijian islands from any harm. And so the people of Polynesia and Melanesia, they had a very close relationship with sharks, and they did not see them as the villains that we see them. In fact, in this picture, it shows a Hawaiian story of, Kamoheili, who's a shark god of the Polynesians. And in this picture, he's basically been given fermented herbs, basically drugs, to help the Polynesian fishermen find their way home. And so they saw sharks much differently than we do. And our perceptions, I think, began to change when we started learning more about them. And there's a very famous artist and conservationist by the name of Guy Harvey out of South Florida, who started painting sharks not in the negative ways that you saw with Copley and Homer, but with the natural look of what a shark actually does. And here we see the shark in its hunting mode, and he actually looks fairly fearsome, but he's going after seals. And he's going after them in a way that, you would actually see a great white do it. And that, I think, began to change people's perspective. And then we also saw sharks later on with the work of Robert Wyland, who was very famous for his pastoral ocean scenes, where sharks became just another part of the ocean environment, as much as important as dolphins and sea turtles and stingrays and the reef fish themselves. And as we learned more, we began to, I think, defang sharks, which I think was a good thing. And then we also created comic strips like Sherman's Lagoon, one of my favorites. And we also created everyone's favorite song. And then what we would also see is that many people have also wanted to be tough like sharks. And so, for instance, one of my favorite logos in sports is the logo of the Cape Town Sharks, a rugby team in Cape Town, South Africa, which is interesting because South Africa has actually had some of the most largest number of unprovoked great white shark attacks in the world. And then people now, frankly, love them, and they use them as their logos, and they use them as tourism. So we have transcended how I think we look at sharks, but I think there's still a long way for us to go. And now I'm gonna, with a more scientific perspective than the pop culture, I'm gonna welcome up Charles Rolsky of ASU and Laboratory Casual, who will bring a different perspective.
All right, that was really good. Gotta make sure I don't go long. Scientists like to talk really long.
We're good on time, so don't
So, I am a PhD student. I'm currently researching plastic pollution around the world. I've done field work with killer whales, which have been known to prey on sharks, so that's kind of a cool connection. My favorite shark's the megamouth. I think they're really cool and elusive, but I've been around the ocean quite a bit, both as a kid and as a scientist. As he was saying, I recently spoke at the state capitol, talked to people there about why, even though we're not bordering the ocean, it is important. It's a topic of conversation for Arizona because there are still a lot of connections there. Of course, being 12 years old inside, I had to be really professional about it, and that's what I ended up looking like. I wore a shirt. It actually drew a lot of people over, and it also got a lot of weird looks, but I don't really care about that. The message was resonated, which is the only important thing. So, personally, my inspiration, when I was a kid, I used to watch this awesome show. It's pretty good, pretty solid. I was heavily influenced by a lot of naturalists. Unfortunately, TV now kind of sucks when it comes to nature shows and Animal Planet. It's all these really weird, stupid things. But when I was a kid, I was fortunate to watch Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin. They were both heavily influential on me as a kid. I also used to like Shark Week, but that's something we're going to talk about shortly. And then, yeah, of course, movies like Jaws and Deep Blue Sea, I really like that as well. So, when I was approached with this opportunity, I thought it was really exciting for me because even though there's these really cool influences around, a lot of the perceptions and a lot of the words used around sharks were kind of alarming to me initially. So the first thing that we always do as scientists is just Google it to see what's going on. So these were the most recent searches that came up. One's about a giant great white shark, and then great white sharks gathering off the coast. It's always great white sharks that get all the attention. People report that they're gathering in this one area, and it's like that's their habitat. You know? It's like you're saying, "Oh my God, they went to their house." But when you look at the words, giant great white shark. Oh, the other one's in the middle. That's pretty cool. Whoa, that was strange. Hold on. Let me start over here. Good that we have time. It's always something that goes wrong. There we go. Okay. You got the wrong button.
Sorry.
No, there we go. Okay. So giant great white sharks gathering, and then here it says that they're lurking. And when you Google lurking, this image came up. I kind of adapted it to look like a shark. So lurking, again, is a word that I don't understand if the shark's just chilling looking for something to eat, and it's lurking. So then I went to the next most popular search, and that's YouTube. So if I just look at a couple of these, the boldest bites, savage great white sharks. I did watch the bottom one. That's a horrifying video. I don't know if you've seen that one with the shark goes inside. But again, you're putting a cage in the water with sharks. Good.
And I'll talk about that in a minute.
But again, the words, right? Intense, savage, terrifying, scary. The perception is always just negative. And I don't really understand that, and I don't really like it that much. So I started to dive a little bit, again, into Shark Week. And these are funny, right? So Monster Tag, Air Jaws, The Hunted, Great White Shark, Serial Killer Lives, Great Hammerhead Invasion. So the shark is invading the ocean. That makes so much sense. Devil sharks, right? Good. This one is my favorite one. I don't want to read the whole thing, but these people spend 2 days floating with sharks with no food, water, or sleep. Their physical condition deteriorates, and their risk of shark attack rises. How will the sharks behave, and will the men get attacked? This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? It's like saying on land, okay, we're going to starve these people and put them with a bunch of lions, and let's just see what happens. And is that going to make us like lions more? No, it's going to make us afraid of them. And so at the very bottom, in the smallest of small fine print, it says that they're teaming up to save their sharks, working with major brands to raise money for Oceana and all this stuff. I had to dive really deeply to find this. And does anyone watch The Office here?
The what?
The Office, the TV show, Steve Carell. Yeah, so it reminds me of an episode where the main character, Steve Carell, says something really nice about someone else, but not in their presence. So he says, I would never say this to her face, but she's a wonderful person and a gifted artist. And then the other guy says, why wouldn't you say that to her face? It's kind of the same thing. It's like when you're saying this really nice thing way far down after calling them serial killers and the devil and all this other stuff. So, yeah, I mean, this title, I'm sure must be earned, right? So I did, again, a little bit more digging. Sharks are, in fact, a deadly animal, right? They must kill a ton of people per year. 10. We've got wolves. 10. Elephants. We have, again, when we have a show where we're starving people and putting them next to elephants, I don't think so. But they still kill more people than sharks. We've got lions at 100. We've got hippos at 500. We've got crocodiles at 1,000. We've got, those are this parasitic worm at 2,500. Other parasitic animals at 10,000. Man's best friend, 25,000. Again, starving people with dogs, I don't think so. Snakes, 50,000. People, the worst of all of them, 475,000. And the very worst, mosquitoes, 725,000. So again, all of these really terrible, terrifying, savage serial killer devil right at the very end at 10. So I don't really understand this. This is the monster devil serial killer right here. And so it's frustrating as a scientist because, you see these pictures, just a very basic Google search, right? And it's always this terrifying great white. And I'm doing a very random search. I'm not searching for these specifically. But we know, unfortunately, we know that for every one of these pictures, there's one of these. There's a shark fin being removed. There's a great hammerhead being entangled there in fishing net, and I think that's a great white there that was caught accidentally. So shark finning by itself can kill an estimated 100 million more sharks per year. Tens of millions are getting caught as bycatch. In the 1990s, more than 12 million sharks and rays were caught as bycatch. Now, unfortunately, when they take in a shark, it's then becoming kind of nice for their wallet to have the fins removed and sewn. So there's not going to be really a big push to put them back in the ocean. So I think what needs to change with a lot of this and a lot of science in general is we have to change our words with this stuff. We can't call them serial killers and devil and all this because it's just going to perpetuate that they're just these killers and these savages, but all predators kill. So it's not like that they're any different. They're really amazing animals. They're crucial to the ecosystem. And just like so many other animals in the ocean, it's hard for us to get an estimate on their numbers. Maybe their numbers are better than we thought. Most of the time it's probably worse than we thought. So it's a really dangerous game to play with them. And so I think we do need to, the next generation of people, and us included, we need to kind of change how we label these, what we call them, because we know that they face these threats every day from us. And then I'll wrap with my favorite quote from Sylvia Earle. Sharks are beautiful animals, and if you're lucky to see lots of them, that means you're in a healthy ocean. You should be afraid if you're in the ocean and you don't see sharks. That's probably my favorite quote about them. So thank you very much for your time.
And one thing Charles showed was one of the video of the cage breach. You can very commonly see it on YouTube. And when that happens, that's not because of the shark. That's because the shark wrangler, especially on a certain liveaboard, which I won't name, the Nautilus, they like to get the baits right in front of the cage so people can get really good shots. But the problem is that sharks don't really have good eyesight up close. They rely on their senses of electroreception and the lateral line sense, which detects pressure waves. And when you pull the bait away, their eyes have already, the nictitating membrane has either come up or the eyes have rolled back. They can't see anymore, so they're going full tilt after a bait, and they'll ram themselves into the cage. And when you see blood, that's not from the people, that's from the gills on the shark. It's being compressed. Imagine if someone went in and reached into your lungs and squeezed it. That's what's happening with the sharks. And so that's why you see, so yeah, when you see those videos, you shouldn't like them. You should like find out which liveaboard did that and complain about their shark wranglers. So with us next is going to be to talk about the movie side, the pop cultural side, the modern, everything I think from possibly Deep Blue Sea and 47 Meters Down to the more obscure ones like Zombie and other shark-related films. To give us a quick review on that, and then we're going to take some audience questions.
All right, hey guys. So my name is Victor Moreno. Some of you might know me from Cult Classics AZ. I also host most of the genre programming over at the Alamo Drafthouse here in Phoenix. Have you guys been to the Alamo Drafthouse before? All right. So I host the monthly horror series Terror Tuesday, as well as Video Vortex and Fist City, which are all basically different verbiage for like exploitation, cheesy horror movies. So I'm also a historian by education, so I'm just going to give you kind of my take on where the whole pop culture modern reputation of the shark comes from, just like an early one. And a lot of it comes from, as we all know, Jaws is the granddaddy of shark movies. It came out in 1975. It took its poster from the paperback cover because it's just so impactful. And movies like Jaws, prior to Steven Spielberg making a big budget staple, back then this was the original blockbuster, were waylaid into this genre basically called exploitation movies. Have you guys heard of exploitation movies before? So for those who don't, it's usually when low-budget filmmakers, guys like Ed Wood and such, like they would sell a movie to a distributor based on the subject matter. Usually they would just have a poster or a title and they'd say something like Monsters from Outer Space bring zombies back to life, or Glenn or Glenda, she man or woman, So and it would be stuff like a shark terrorizes the sea, and that's it. And they would film the movie based on the title, and they would pre-sell it to so many drive-ins, or as they were, or basically like exploitation movie theaters, like the 42nd Street movie houses, that all they would play basically would be like adult movies or really cheap horror movies, because this would keep them going the whole year round. What Spielberg did by making Jaws a blockbuster is it kind of like flipped that paradigm, and people like Roger Corman were making movies that were based on, stunt rock and all these kind of like little things like, okay, well, now sharks are the new thing. So what ended up happening is not even a year after Jaws came out, we had the first Jaws shark exploitation ripoff. It's a movie called Mako, the Jaws of Death, because, Jaws is a great white shark, a Japanese shark, a Mako shark. This became the next thing. A year after that, there came another movie called Tintorera that was filmed in Mexico, and this had the tiger shark. Because this is what you notice a lot about sharks, is they tend to have these kind of like really cool like names, like, oh my god, how many different ways can we spell monster? Tiger shark. And over time, like, even though you can see like sharks, if you see them in a natural environment, they have to move to stay alive. It's very easy to like look at these things that have jaws, like rows and rows of teeth, and look kind of scary coming at you to make them into any kind of every monster. In fact, in 1979, there's an Italian horror movie that came out called Zombie here, and in Italy it was called Zombie 2 because it was trying to rip off Dawn of the Dead, because in Italy, Dawn of the Dead is called Zombie. There's a scene in that movie where these characters are going to an island to find, zombies, and then the girl's son decides to, go diving topless, and she finds a shark down there.
They only do that in Italy.
Only in Italy. Topless shark diving. And then along the way, a zombie just happens to come out and try to attack the girl, and then the shark gets in the way, and then I encourage you to find this on YouTube. Just type in zombie versus shark. Because you'll see a stuntman dressed in, who's got he's getting water from or air from a tank somewhere, and he's trying to shoot it so it looks like the shark and the zombie are fighting, and we keep cutting to try to make it look like the zombie's literally doing something other than just moving around. And at several points, you can see him smash, either put pieces of raw meat around the zombie to make it look like he's biting the zombie, or smashing blood capsules to make it look like he took a bite out of it. And then near the end of this fight, the stuntman has a fake arm, which you can literally tell is basically one of those ground beef logs wrapped in a flannel arm thing to make it look like the zombie takes a bite out of his arm, or the shark takes a bite out of the zombie's arm. So these are just little ways where filmmakers trying to capitalize on Jaws and the kind of panic around sharks, zombies aren't enough, we need sharks. Sharks fight zombie money. And you would think that would end. Unfortunately, throughout the 80s, we saw there's 3 unfortunate sequels to Jaws where they kind of keep getting worse and worse. Especially when you get to Jaws 4: The Revenge, where we actually see the shark's point of view as it's stalking, Chief Brody's family. And it's pretty bad when literally you have Chief Brody's wife as the protagonist of a Jaws sequel. And you're getting flashbacks to Roy Scheider, who was Chief Brody in Jaws, because he didn't want to come back for this movie. He was too busy doing Sequest DSV.
Science advisor Bob Ballard.
Yes. So what I can tell you is, keep ignoring those movies, even Jaws 3D, because by the time you get to 2000, you think, hey, if we lived through Sequest, people, we know science, we have the internet, and then something happened, you guys, called the Sci-Fi Channel. And it didn't start where you thought it would start. It started, very innocently enough with movies like Two-Headed Shark Attack, which spawns 5 sequels, not Two-Headed Shark Attack 2. No, it's Three-Headed Shark Attack, Four-Headed Shark Attack, Five-Headed Shark Attack, and Six-Headed Shark Attack. I'm not lying, people. Then, after that, we get something called Mega Shark. This is brought to us by our new friends at the Asylum. The Asylum exists only to make movies based on more popular movies. So if you ever went to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video in the 90s and 2000s, and you were looking for, oh, is that movie out on video? Oh, I don't remember this being the poster with a slightly different name. So when we get stuff like Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, Mega Shark versus Crocosaurus, Mega Shark versus Mega Shark, Mega Shark versus Colossus, and then Mega Shark versus Moby Dick. Because we got to make the literature, folks. You know, and you know, along the ways there were things like Deep Blue Sea, because, you know, Samuel L. Jackson needs to get eaten by a shark. And then, I'm going to say it, you all know what I'm going to say it. It's called Sharknado. Yeah, guys, there's a lot of Sharknado movies. There's Sharknado. There's Sharknado 2, the second one. There's Sharknado 3, oh hell no. Sharknado 4, The Fourth Awakens. Sharknado 5, Global Swarming. And finally, the last Sharknado, It's About Time. And these movies made a lot of money for the Sci-Fi Channel and the Asylum. I'm pretty sure it's the only reason Ian Ziering was going to be a guest here. But I can tell you folks, it's kind of the flip of what happened in the 70s and 80s, because special effects are really relatively inexpensive now. You can have a bunch of kind of like TV stars from the 80s and 90s, like David Hasselhoff, or Tara Reid or Ian Ziering running around on a green screen and make a spinning funnel of sharks that doesn't make any sense scientifically, but you're just going to sit there and eat some munchies and other edible things. But I will tell you folks, maybe there's a turnaround coming, maybe there isn't, but I will say the prestige of these movies is kind of turned around, because now you're seeing movies like The Shallows, which is kind of one step above the Sci-Fi Channel. I mean, you do get to see Blake Lively cuss out a shark in it. You get to see like Nicolas Cage starring in movies like USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, which is basically a made-for-cable adaptation of Quint's story from Jaws. So Nicolas Cage fighting sharks. And then last year we had The Meg. What was your favorite thing about The Meg?
Oh, the love story between Jason Statham and the kid.
Right.
They had the best chemistry. Like, he was the best shark dad ever.
Yeah. And also Jason Statham punching a giant shark. And that's the thing. These movies like The Meg, which are primarily financed overseas, they're not making these just for us anymore. These are international audiences. They're like, we want to see big budget version of Giant Monster, give us a shark. So we could have had the cheeky Megalodon, but instead we got The Meg. And now we're having The Meg 2. It's on its way. It's going to happen.
No.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Klute can tell you more.
Right.
That's an amazing story. Just waiting to happen.
Right.
You know, but that's basically the gist of shark movies from the 70s till now. It's an inexpensive way to source an easy villain, you know, while having kind of like a ham-fisted human story. Kind of like the new Godzilla movies.
Alright.
Okay, so I'm going to open up questions. I'm going to start with my first question. So, and you guys kind of covered it lightly. So, I'm from Minnesota, so I was blessed with lakes and not ocean. And my dad loved to show me things before I was ready to see them. So I saw Jaws when I was very young, and I was scared for a very long time to get in the ocean. So I was one of those guys, and knowing the Klute for as long as I have, it's really opened my eyes to the realities of sharks, where before I was horrified. Just had to force myself to go in the ocean. So I'm kind of like one of those people he's talking about. So so you guys talked about your inspiration. What was the trigger that made you love sharks versus, where I was like horrified of sharks?
I think for me it was actually the old 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ride at Disneyland. where you are on board Disney World, because you're on board the Nautilus with Captain Nemo, and you're traveling through the graveyard of lost ships, where like the Sargasso Sea, where I see shark shipwrecks, and they had these sharks swimming around, and while they were meant to be threatening to me, they were like, this is fascinating. Why aren't there sharks swimming closer to me? I want to get the closer look at them. And my dad's like, they're not real. And so he took me to the ocean, and so one of the first sharks I ever saw, which is actually technically not a shark, it's actually a shark ray, small-tooth sawfish. And it's was a 12-foot animal, and I was swimming out in the ocean. I went to a buoy line where there was the end of the swimming area, and I looked down, and there was this just massive fish. And I was scared because I had been taught by Jaws to be scared. And so I hightailed it back to shore. And then as I'm catching my breath, I felt cheated, like I cheated myself out of something, because there was this magnificent animal that I had a chance to have a moment that will never be recaptured, especially now that the small-tooth sawfish is one of those that's critically endangered. You should never, ever, 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 ever buy the nose of a small-tooth sawfish. And if you see one in the wild, there's actually in Florida, you can actually report it to the Florida Wildlife Commission, and they're tracking through civilian reports where sawfish are. But so for me, it was that moment where everything I was told I confirmed to be a lie, that the shark had no interest in me whatsoever, and it was thrilling more than scary. But the fight or flight instinct takes over. And so ever since then, I've literally thrown myself into the water where if there is a shark nearby. I practice safe diving practices, but if there's a shark nearby, you have to keep me from just jumping in before everyone else. Charles?
I was always really into them as a kid, watching those TV shows, and I always rooted for the predators. I thought they were pretty cool. The prey wasn't that interesting. So I always had that fascination. But I was in Florida with my family, and I was bored because my family's being boring, and I got some fishing line and just a hook, and I had some bacon, so I threw it on there. I was trying to catch small fish, and I ended up accidentally catching a nurse shark, a small one. Wow. And my first thought was that we were all going to die. Like, oh my God. And you can tell, right? Nurse sharks are extremely dangerous.
Oh yeah, no.
They use suction to feed. They're really, really cool.
Yeah, here's the sound of attack.
Yeah, it's like a vacuum cleaner.
Right.
Yeah, so it was quite a hassle to get it freed, but then it just humanized it a lot. In that I saw it struggling, and I saw how cool it was, and it just made it really, being that close to it, seeing it kind of in a position where I knew they faced similar things in the ocean, it really showed them to be quite gentle and really just neat and beautiful animals. And the more I learned about them, the more I thought they were just badass.
Yeah.
I know these aren't like the best places to go to now, but when I was younger, we went to SeaWorld a lot. And, there they have basically like they have the moving walkway, like they have at the airports, and they built like a shark thing around it. You can see them all swimming around you, and that was like, whoa, that's like super cool. That's kind of like, you grow up like seeing stuff like that. It's like, these are kind of like those, like really one of those like cool animals, like I have like manta rays or whatnot. It's like, yeah, they're probably there's a reason their movies are just so cool. So it kind of opens up a fascination with it early if you get to see like them when you're young.
That's cool. Thanks, guys. So open up for audience questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Is the major threat endangered species more direct, like fishing or nets or things, or is climate and habitat damage?
I would say overfishing by and large.
I mean, yeah, you can.
Overfishing is by and large the largest, whether it's targeted fisheries or bycatch. Climate change is a concern in that it can change. For instance, in Sodwana Bay, South Africa, the whale sharks used to be so prevalent there that it's the actual logo of many of the dive operations. They have not seen a whale shark in Sodwana Bay for 5 years. And they believe locally it could very well be due to overfishing, because that area is targeted by the Taiwanese and Chinese fishing fleets. But also the climate has changed. They've noticed it where they're getting certain species that they hadn't gotten before, and certain species are going away. Potato cod is a keystone species in that area. And it's a big, neat-looking fish, got these weird-looking spots. And it's a big animal, and they like colder water. And so they have been going away. Now remember, well, you don't know this probably, but Sodwana Bay is right on the tip of the South African coast. The next stop is Antarctica. And this area has some cold water flows that come up during times of the year, and the potato cod don't follow. Now again, could be overfishing because it's not a very well-studied area, but likely it is due to climate change. Plastic pollution is a problem for certain species. Someone had mentioned, it was Victor actually, you mentioned that sharks need to stay moving to live. And that is a process we call ram ventilation, where the sharks have to do that to breathe. Some sharks also have to do that to feed. Whale sharks, basking sharks, your favorite, the megamouth. And so they can actually ingest plastic as they're feeding, and that can build up in their bodies and starve them. But I would say if you were ranking the concerns, I would say overfishing up here, habitat loss, climate change, put them in the same thing. Down here, plastic pollution for certain species, it could be up here, but for the most part, it's probably down here. You still should not take care to do whatever you can to limit your own plastic use, and that's not a license to plastic pollute.
Right. Young lady in the pink shirt.
What can I do to get the sharks that are endangered to get out from being an endangered species?
It's a really good question. Well, I think at your age, what I should have done more is I should have researched it more myself. You know, what am I most interested in about a shark? Do you have a favorite shark species? Megalodon.
Well, we're not bringing him back, but.
And say it again?
And great white shark.
Great white shark, sure. So that's a good question. What would you outline as the biggest threats to great whites specifically?
Great whites are interesting because they are, in some areas, are actually recovering. North Atlantic great white species, because of the protections that have been given to them by the United States and Canadian governments, they're actually coming back, but in certain areas, they are not. And what I would recommend to you and to anyone is, if you're going to do shark tourism to see great whites in the wild, make sure it's responsible shark tourism. You want to make sure your operators aren't the cowboys of a certain liverboard that I didn't mention. You want to make sure they've got a good reputation. Find out if they work with any scientific organizations. And never buy shark products. Now, for instance, cosmetics. Look for an ingredient called squalene, SQUALENE. And what that is actually shark oil that they put into cosmetics. And it's very common. If you go to a Russian store up in North Phoenix, they have Russian cosmetics. Almost all of them have squalene in it. And great whites are actually a big producer of it. And in Mexico, ask where your shark or your fish taco came from, because great whites are a targeted species, or they were. They're still kind of poached. But at the time, they were actually targeted for their meat because you could get a lot of fish meat off of one great white, and they would use these in fish tacos. So sustainable seafood, sustainable cosmetics, just make sure it doesn't have squalene, responsible shark tourism, and don't buy shark's teeth. If you find a shark tooth, that is a special gift from the ocean. If you buy a shark tooth, you don't know where it came from.
And I think one of the most important things you can do is if you have the chance to give like reports or do projects at your school to show people that they aren't these monster, scary animals, and maybe expose the side of sharks that they can be very incredibly calm creatures that aren't trying to kill everything. So if you have that opportunity, I would definitely do that as well. You have a lot of the older folks here need an education, so you can teach a lot of them some new things. That's a good question.
Yes, sir.
So there's an interaction between orcas and great whites, usually off the southern coast of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you have a theory, or if anybody has a theory, what's really going on there with that interaction?
I heard they're super into the liver of the great whites. That's one of my favorite stories because it also happened off the coast of California. There was footage of a killer whale with a great white in its mouth, and the great white shark was upside down. And this was really interesting to scientists because there are scientists that study sharks in shallow water, and to kind of get their body to shut down, they'll turn them upside down, and the body kind of goes into a catatonic state. So the scientists started looking into it, and they found that these killer whales are from the LA pod. They like to prey on stingrays and on the bottom of the ocean or ocean floor near it. And so what the killer whales would do is they'd go down to interact with the stingrays, but instead of being right side up, they'd be upside down. They would grab the stingray, right themselves, and the stingray would be upside down. So the killer whales have figured out before scientists that you could delay or reduce the risk of getting, stuck or bitten by turning the animal upside down. And so now they've been doing that same type of technique on sharks. I don't know about South Africa, but it happened off the coast of California, which is really cool. I know we were talking about sharks, but
Yeah.
killer whales are fun.
Well, there actually are. So, Victor, was there not a Jaws knockoff about killer whales?
Orca, yeah.
Yeah, and that movie freaked me out as a kid because there's this one scene where my parents had to take me out. I was not able to stay in the theater, where they killed a pregnant female orca and she gave a post-mortem birth, and I lost it. I'm like, no, done. How would you rate that movie in the shark knockoff pantheon?
Not one of my favorites.
We had the Eskimo version of Quint, though.
Yeah, true.
Or Inuit, sorry, Inuit.
Yeah, so many movies had versions of Quint then.
I'll get you one second. But in South Africa, actually, there is what's really interesting. So everyone has seen, at least you've seen video of the orcas at SeaWorld, and they have something called dorsal fin collapse disorder. I think that's the name of it, right? And there are two orcas that are named port and starboard. And I thought this was just a legend. I thought this was just media hype. But I actually had a chance to go to Seal Island in January. And we were looking for great whites. And I had already seen the Guadalupe, so I wasn't necessarily super disappointed that we didn't see them because I got to see seven gill sharks that have moved into the ecological niche of the great white. But these two sharks, port and starboard, have apparently been kicked out of their pods. And they have basically formed their own cooperative hunting unit. And they decided that it's really easy to kill sharks. And so what they believe, and there's been some study to prove this, is that when a shark is killed, it produces, as we all do, certain necrotic chemicals. And that these chemicals are basically a trigger warning to the other sharks to get out of Dodge. And so it happened, the ones you mentioned in San Francisco, where the stomach had been ripped open, the liver had been eaten, and they had all these tracked sharks, especially the big females. They call them the sisterhood. They live off the Farallon Islands. And every single shark went deep and went back to Hawaii real fast. And at Cape Town, at Seal Island, the great whites have, it took them longer to get the message, but about 5 or 6 sharks that we know of were killed, and now Cape Town is almost devoid of great whites, to the point where the seven gills, which are normally a deep cold water species, have said, man, there are a lot of dead seals on the surface. We should go up and check that out. And now the port and starboard have decided that seven gills are on the menu. So.
And they even have like certain tracked animals, so when a killer whale moves in, you see all the GPSs just take off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great whites are big, they get like 18 feet,
Yeah.
right? But a large male killer whale can get around 30, 32 feet. They're
Yeah.
big.
There's that one scene in Jaws 2 with the orca washed up on shore. And what's the line? Sharks don't take things personal, Chief Brody. But the shark killed the orca. That would not. Again, it could, but like a great white would have to be like really big, and the killer whale would have to be like a baby or like a really injured adult. Like it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, they're in pods.
Yeah.
And they're all led by a bunch of strong, kick-ass women that'll take you.
Yeah.
I mean, one other thing I guess you could do to help, sustain like shark populations is to look to see if there's congressmen who support bills that can help stuff regarding shark populations or because a lot of times they want to deregulate oil. Let oil companies start doing stuff offshore that can affect shark populations. So just support politicians that have policies that will help shark and endangered sea life populations. And this, just to tie it back into what I was talking about, the big bad guy in the first Jaws movie is that terrible mayor who lets them stay open during the 4th of July weekend. He's still the mayor in Jaws too. I'm just telling you, voting matters.
Yeah, that's actually really true. I think you would, at the state legislature, you probably would agree with that, and you probably maybe encountered some resistance from the freedom-loving brigade that thinks that banning plastic bags is a concern.
We had a question from the
Right.
Hufflepuff? Ryan? All right.
I just have a question specifically about like sharks in pop culture. For the most part, it's all horror, obviously.
Yeah.
Because they're depicted as monsters. sharks are amazing, and I love sharks, and I devoured every horror shark movie I could find, and every outlet I could possibly. So do you think that shark depiction in pop, because typically horror fans kind of side with the monster a lot.
Yes.
That tends to be where we go for whatever reason. Do you think that shark depiction in pop culture is specifically detrimental to the legacy of the shark, or the shark, like the pro-shark agenda that it should be? Or do you think it just needs to be more representation of sharks in other forms of pop culture?
Well, I mean, part of it is to like I was making the point, it's easy to have sharks as the villains of things just because they're an easy villain because of pop culture. You know, just like if you're making a horror movie at like a campsite, a slasher guy is going to be the easy target. But at the same time, that can always get subverted in a positive way. Like if you watch the Finding Nemo and Finding Dory movies. Yeah, that's right. The shark's name is Bruce, right? Right, and in Jaws, the nickname of the shark they use is Bruce. So it's basically a way of paying homage to that in a different way and kind of making it amenable to like a different generation.
And this is actually, and I would say, I know, Charles, you may have the same experience. I kind of wanted to be Matt Hooper.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. From Jaws.
Yeah.
You know, where he was the cool guy in the movie. You know, he was the one that's like, yeah, they're all gonna die. You know. So I think that also drove a lot of people. And there was actually a Shark Week special a couple years back called "How Jaws Changed the World," and it focused on that, where a lot of marine scientists have said. I think Dr. Hoyos from Guadalupe, he actually was inspired by that movie. So it cuts both ways, and I think as we're seeing like now with Moana and Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, we're seeing sharks as still, you know, the tough guys, but or tough women, because the toughest sharks are actually the female sharks. They have to be, because if you've ever seen shark reproduction mating practices, women have to be tough at that. But we're seeing them more as not the villain. Maui's the hero, one of the heroes of Moana. At the end of Finding Nemo, you see Bruce and his friends greeting the residents of the reef with a friendly hello. Destiny from Finding Dory. So I think we are changing our perceptions, but it's only because people are becoming more educated. And I think that's the real key. It's a hashtag, but it's a meaningful hashtag. It's replace fear with facts. And that's what everyone should do. You have more of a chance of dying by falling off a toilet, getting crushed by a vending machine, by a dog, than you do by getting injured by even seeing a shark sometimes. You know, I was in South Africa where, you know, sharks are, and we would dive at Salwana Bay. I did 9 dives there, and I only saw sharks on 2 dives. In an area that should be, you know, filled with sharks. This is their home. This is what they do. And I saw a nice reef shark, and I saw a couple sand tigers, and that was about it. And so, you know, we need to change our practices as how we see the ocean, both in the way that we get rid of plastic, both in the way that we harvest the seas, and we need to focus on sustainable fisheries. Although no practice is perfect, the Seafood Watch app you can download. You can punch in where your fish is from. Like, you know, I'm eating tuna from the North Pacific and it was wild caught. And you can put that in there and it'll tell you that yes, it's safe to eat. Not necessarily for you, but for the fish. Right. And I think that's important. So, Jaws is a mixed bag when it comes to its legacy.
What your opinion of O-Search and the fact that people can kind of identify with and follow their tagged sharks?
O-Search is controversial, I think you'd agree. I mean,
yeah, that's
I don't know where you stand on it. I mean, I've met Chris Fisher. I think his heart is in the right place.
What's O-Search?
Oh, for those who don't know, O-Search is they basically do shark tagging, and then what they do is through their work with Caterpillar, the tractor company, they track these sharks continually through satellite tags. And a lot of people have gotten to know these sharks by their names that they were given. But some people feel that the O-Search practices are more invasive because what they do is they literally pull the sharks out of the ocean and then attach the tag and then let them go. Whereas most tagging, like the University of Massachusetts Fisheries Department, they actually will chase after the sharks and stick them from the surface, but the shark never leaves the water. And most people, I think, most scientists see the value in leaving the animal in the water versus taking it out. And so I like OSearch because it does get citizens involved, even if it's just for school projects. You asked about what you could do in school. You asked about what you could do in school. Well, you can go to the OSearch website and you can track a shark, and then you can show, you can also cross-reference what the weather's like at that day. And you can maybe see if you can find a pattern of why the shark comes to the surface. So stuff like that. But so I think there's value in that, but I think there is obviously concerns.
Yeah, I mean, so it's tough because if there's a paper in front of me that says the removal of sharks from the ocean for tagging purposes introduces risk of X, Y, and Z and causes mortality and like something like that. If I were to see that, then I would say this is alarming. But as scientists, we can't really be picky if people are A, getting involved with sharks that aren't formally trained as scientists, and B, if it's not in a negative way, then I support it because I think it's really neat. She the young woman over there, she can go and Google it and find a shark that she likes and track it. Oh, that's really cool. As far as their practices, I mean, it's the ocean. It's really difficult to do things. So there's people that I've worked with that don't get within 200 yards of killer whales to analyze it. They look at their scat. And then there's people that get right up and close and get a biopsy sample. The biopsy sample gives information live, right? And then poop is information that's maybe over the course of a couple of days. So yeah, maybe the biopsy introduces infection. It may be dangerous, but it gives us really good information. So sometimes the benefits outweigh the cost. But all in all, I think it's a really neat way for people to connect with the ocean and with sharks specifically. I think it's really positive.
Victor, have you ever tracked any sharks?
So what?
Have you ever tracked any sharks?
No. Maybe some street shark toys.
Do we have one more question out over here?
Yeah,
You're okay? Okay.
No, I was just going to say, and you covered kind of the education thing, because I'm a docent at Shark Aquarium in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, so I'm one of those people that stands around and talks about the animals. And it's amazing, because when we have a Philippines exhibit that has well, for us, it has a pretty big shark exhibit. And we don't have anything real huge. They're, oh gosh, I forget what they're called. Anyway, sandbar sharks. So, but these kids that come up and you start talking about sharks. Oh, sharks are nasty. They'll eat you. It's like, or you hear the parents talking about, how these animals are, and you just want to go up there and, but you have to remain calm and, proceed to explain as to why these animals are important, because they're like the garbage men of the ocean, and they keep the oceans cleanest, they can,
Right.
fish, things like that. So it is education, and the more these people get to hear stuff like that and realize that they're not the savage beasts, and the ratio of how many sharks are killed to how many people are killed by sharks.
Right.
It starts, you can see on their faces that, they may not walk out of there and go, oh no, I'm gonna protect sharks, but the wheels are turning, and that's the main thing.
Yeah, and I would say that's...
The more they hear stuff like that, the more they can get the facts is in my opinion, like the best thing, because that's...
And that's where I think people like Charles, who takes time out to do something like this. I'd actually like to give him a big round of applause as a science student and PhD candidate to slum it with us nerds. But
Okay,
and
guys.
Victor and Ruby, who've done.
We're at 2 minutes.
Okay.
Or 1 minute. So do you want to let them know where they can find everybody? And
Yeah,
where can you
we'll
find
do
us
that
on
real quick.
Twitter?
And I'll stay hanging around for a few minutes if any questions. I think Charles will do the same, and Victor, and if you have any movie recommendations or things people should see, where can they find you?
So if you're interested in anything we do, and if we do when we do the Jaws in the water, you can find us at cultclassicsaz.com. If you want to watch this panel after the weekend, you can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/C/cultclassics, and you'll find this panel up there.
And we also run a website or we run Geekly Phoenix on Facebook, which just advertises local fun events, for the weirdos out there.
Yeah.
To support the local weirdos.
Yeah, and we do a movie podcast called Cult Following. You can find it at cultfollowing.co.
Charles?
I don't have anything like that. Yeah, you can just Google my
Wait,
name.
somebody doesn't have a podcast? Wait.
Yeah, no, I don't have that.
No podcast yet?
No.
So you're in the right place to find how to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if you are looking for me, you can find me at theklute.com, which desperate for content right now, but I'm going to put some stuff up after Comic-Con. I would also encourage you to check out some of the NGOs that I work with. Fins Attached Marine Research and Conservation. They are a NGO out of Colorado Springs. They've just christened their first boat after Rob Stewart. They named it the Sharkwater, and they are currently working with, I forget the other group, but they're currently in the Bahamas working with National Geographic, so you'll be able to see them on what they call Shark Fest. And I encourage you also to write National Geographic and maybe tell them to stop doing those when sharks attack specials, because those aren't helpful. 9 times out of 10 it's like, the shark approached a woman as she was swimming in the water. Well, what's he gonna do, come up on a boat? You know? But you know, your advertising dollars and your eyeballs watching the screen make a difference to these people. And if you call them and say, or send them a tweet, or send them an email, or a letter bomb, don't do that. But let them know that maybe they should do better programming, and that they will do that. And the other one I work with is Shark Angels, which is a classroom outreach group out of the Northeast, and they do some really cool stuff where you can adopt a shark. And we're putting together a project where you'll be able to learn about the shark laws that govern fisheries in all countries around the world that have an ocean. And we're starting on that, and I'll be doing South Africa this month. So check that out. Thank you. Thank you. And more important, thank you for taking time out of your Comic-Con schedule to get a little science in you today.
And street sharks.
And street sharks. Thank you,
Rate the panel. Rate your panel.
Oh, rate your panel. Give us 5 stars.
Bring us